Hey, y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is my college football summer school series on Cover 3. I bring on the team experts from the 24/7 sports staff and ask them the questions I care about. No fluff. Which players will be toughest to replace? What position groups are sneakily better or worse than I realize? We get you the scoop on each team in 20 minutes or less. Let's go. Hey, guys, welcome back. Bud Elliott here, and this is my college football summer school series on the Cover 3 podcast. And today, we are talking Virginia, and for that, I'm going to bring in Jacquie Franciuli of Wahoo's 24/7. Jacquie, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, bud.
Good to see you again. Long time colleagues here when you were at Florida and now obviously at Virginia. 2022 was on the field a rough start for the Tony Elliott era at UVA. 3-7 off the field, obviously much tougher with the tragic ending and the shooting. Because this is a shorter show, we'll keep this more to the on field. Before, obviously, the end, what surprised you? And I guess, what did you know after reviewing fall camp that was probably likely to happen there?
Yeah, so I think what surprised me was really the lack of cohesiveness on that offense. I know they were going to struggle early on because of the offensive line. Obviously, coming in, having to get a whole new offensive line group was always going to be a challenge for Virginia. But I thought they had enough offensive skilled pieces that had worked together that they can kind of play around it just for the first couple games, but eventually there will be cohesiveness on that offense. We never saw it. So I think that was definitely something that, although we saw a little bit of fall camp when we're looking at last year, I didn't expect to see that much during the season. And I think when you look back now, you think, okay, it makes sense when you have a coach that came in a situation like Tony Elliott did. There was a lot of buy-in factor that was just not there for Virginia as the season went on. And you can see that on the field. And I think that was the big difference and the kind of the variable we weren't really focusing on last year.
So 120th in offense last year, adjusted for opponent, and they didn't make any coordinator or coaching changes. Did that surprise you that they just rolled everybody back?
Not really. Obviously they did have a couple of wide receiver coach. Marcus Hagan's now at Penn State. They brought back Adam Mims, promoted him on the offensive side of the ball. But it didn't surprise me because a lot of what these coaches have been saying was last year they were trying to bring in their scheme, and now they're trying to get the pieces in there. So it wasn't surprising that there wasn't any offensive staff changes because they believe now they do have those pieces, obviously bringing in their own quarterback, Tony Muskett, the transfer out of Monmouth. That is who they see this offense being led by. They're also recruiting their own guys. So as you know, Bud, coaches want their own guys on their team. So once Brennan Armstrong transferred to NC State, now they think, okay, now we have an offense that we can produce ourselves. This is the guys. So now this is really when the coaches are on the clock, right? This is when these are their guys now leading the offense. These are their players that they expect to have success in this offense. So this is when you'll probably see a little bit more of a grading scale, as you will, for this Virginia offense.
So let's go there to quarterback. Brennan Armstrong in 2021, a really very strong year, and they bring back a lot of the same offensive skill in 2022. 7 touchdowns, 12 picks. You mentioned the offensive line. We'll kind of focus on that unit in a second. But he leaves. He was also, interestingly, their leading rusher last year, if you remove the sacks. So Tony Muskett is the guy. What did you see from him in spring?
So what we saw and what we've heard, because Virginia allows us just to see maybe like 10 minutes or so of practice, which is basically just warm-ups and individual drills. So what we've heard a lot from practices and we saw in the spring game is he has a cannon of an arm and he's very accurate. Now, the one thing that I've been told several times by sources within the program is they've been very impressed on how quickly Tony Muskett has learned the actual game book. So that is what a lot of people have been impressed, and also the chemistry that he's been able to build with the skilled players. So a lot of people have been impressed behind the scenes of what they've seen with Tony Muskett. And we saw in the spring game his ability to throw an accurate ball down the field. One of the first passes he threw was a long touchdown to J.R. Wilson, who then shrugged off Tavon Kyle for a touchdown. So Tony Muskett does have the ability to throw long balls and accurate long balls. That's something that last year, when you looked at game film, a lot of things were rushed for Brennan Armstrong. Not a lot of it was his fault early on in the beginning. I mean, the O-line wasn't giving him much time to pass the ball. I mean, he was probably one of the most pressured quarterbacks in college football, according to Pro Football Focus. So, but there were times when Brennan wouldn't take the sack and he would lose yardage or then have a turnover. Though some of those decision makings were still an issue towards the end of the season. So what I'm hearing is Tony Muskett has the ability of having those split game decisions that you would expect from a quarterback, and that's what a lot of people are really excited about. And obviously, he's a prototypical quarterback that Tony Elliott and Des Kitchings want. So again, this is the year where you're saying, okay, this is the offense that you want. This is the guy that you want. So show me what you have on the offense now.
Major question for me on this squad, more than quarterback, and that's certainly encouraging to hear. I think about Muskett and the arm strength. They did lose their top 5 receivers off last year's team. I mean, Jacquie, I've done about 50 preps for these, and I think it's about the 35th one we've shot. I haven't seen that yet. What is this receiver room going to look like? Because they're really starting from scratch. They did go to the portal pretty heavy here.
Yeah, so the good news for Virginia is they did have success in the portal, bringing in Malik Washington, who's going to be good for them in the slot. So because they're losing Kemp, obviously, who went to transfer to Nebraska. Losing Dontavian Wicks, who went to the NFL, that's also a big loss for them. So right now, it's a very inexperienced group. And honestly, there was some talk that they might want to have gotten another wide receiver in a transfer portal during the spring period, but ended up going the DB route because that's another position where they lack depth or experience depth anyways. So for the wide receiver, it's going to be a very young, inexperienced group. Now, the good news is one of the guys returning is Malachi Fields, which has shown a lot of good flashes for Virginia. Last year, he was hurt, which is why you didn't hear a lot of his name pop out. But he's a local kid. You see a lot of talent from him. And he's going to be one of that big threat for them. They want to expect more Demeek Starling, who is a very speedy Virginia wide receiver. He was doing track and field this past season. And I think you're going to see more of him. Then you're going to see freshmen like, sophomore now, J.R. Wilson. He's a guy that I just mentioned. He's a big, able body. He had a little bit of muscle to his frame. And then, honestly, I was a little surprised at this. I expected him to be a playmaker for Virginia, but not this early. Early enrollee, Jaden Gibson from Georgia, who broke a lot of records in the high school ranks. He kind of emerged during spring practice. Not only as a returner, but also as someone who might fight for some reps at wide receiver. He impressed a lot of the coaches. Obviously, had a lot of normal struggles that you expect from a freshman. But towards the middle of spring, he was getting a lot of reps with the 1s and 2s. So, again, this wide receiver unit is going to be very young. So the balance there is having a very experienced running back room that has a lot of pass catchers there as well. So you're going to probably see Xavier Brown in the slot, the sophomore. You're going to see possibly you can probably see Mike Hollins gets a couple of passes, which is what you were seeing last year as well. So you're going to probably see some of that the running back, some of those playmakers go in there as well to kind of help with that passing game.
Especially early on, and the schedule early is not particularly forgiving. I mean, Tennessee, JMU, which was a pretty good Sun Belt team last year, and Maryland, which Maryland did lose a ton. So I guess we really can't speak with certainty about them yet. All right, we have to do it. The offensive line. Now they do lose. I think they're 3 best offensive linemen, but best is a relative term here because this was one of the worst Power 5 groups we've seen in, I don't know. I think that Wake Forest unit about 15 years ago was maybe like 07 or 08 when they were just everybody left. Probably the worst Power 5 unit I've seen, but this was pretty bad. They go to the transfer portal 3 times here. Can this group be the same or better than last year? Like, it's not worse, I think. No,
it can't be worse. Like I said, Brennan Armstrong was the most pressured quarterback in college football. I mean, he couldn't breathe, and in the end, that had so many repercussions because then it affected that mental clock that all quarterbacks have. So even when he did have time, he didn't think he did have time. He never trusted that he had that protection in front of him. So that affected for the whole season. Even when the offensive line was better, it still wasn't working for Virginia. So I think the offensive line is going to be better. I think they have with the additions of the transfer portal guys, obviously Jimmy Christ from Penn State, that was someone that Virginia recruited out of high school. He's come in, got Brian Stevens from Dayton, the best FCS offensive guard, according to Pro Football Focus. And then obviously you got Anana, who came in from Houston, and he's already participated in spring. He's also rotating on the 1s. And you got Mikhail Boley, who was probably one of the most underrated prospects in the first class for Tony Elliott. He's going to factor in as a second-year Virginia player. He started a couple games as a freshman. He's going to be a good asset for them, a lot of experience. Last year, you had a couple of these guys that didn't have a lot of experience. Now they have experience. The only question I have is, how are they going to work together? Because again, it's kind of like the same storyline you see from Virginia and a lot of other teams. It's hard to get those 5 offensive line starters at the same time to build that chemistry. Sometimes you got to move a couple pieces around because of injuries. During spring, they had a couple walk-ons come in. I mean, 2 of the transporter guys are still not on grounds right now. Obviously, they're coming in the summer. So you got to build that chemistry and build it quick. And just like you said, the beginning of the season is not forgiving for Virginia. There's no, let's get this going. Let's get this train started, get a couple good easy games or cupcake games. I mean, you start in Nashville against Tennessee in a neutral site game. So it's hard to kind of go like, welcome to college football, everybody. So it is a little hard for that offensive line to kind of gel that quickly, but it does on paper, it seems like this team is going to be better, especially when you consider that the quarterback can release the ball a little bit quicker. That's going to be the key here.
Absolutely. So let's pivot over to the defense. This was a top, kind of top 50 level defense if you adjust for opponent. I think some of the surface numbers may have been even better because when they were down, teams started just running the ball and kind of run the clock out. Am I correct to be pretty excited about this defensive front? Like they returned everybody who played at least 75 snaps.
No, I think if you're a Virginia fan, you're going to be very, very, very excited about this defensive front. And honestly, this defense in general. Coach Rudd has done a great job with this defense, kind of turning it around from that last year under Bronco Mendenhall. And if you look at this defensive front, I mean, you've got Cam Butler back, Aaron Famui back, Jameer Carter, who is an NFL prospect, back. You've got Chico Bennett, another guy who is getting intriguing talk among NFL scouts. All those guys are back, and there's a lot of depth on the defensive line. You've got Ben Smiley. You've got younger guys coming up that have some experience in there. At linebacker, I know you lose Nick Jackson, who's one of the vocal leaders there, but you also got other guys that are coming up. A lot of depth in that linebacker group, like Stevie Bracey. You've got Trey McDonald. You've got Josh Ahern, James Jackson. So you've got a lot of guys who have game time experience. It's kind of the opposite of what we were talking about on the offensive line. On the offense, where a lot of young guys. On defense, you have a lot of veterans, a lot of guys that know what it takes and know what the expectations are. So I think that's going to be where Virginia has to kind of hang their hat on, is kind of lean on their defense early on until the offense can get that same chemistry and that same kind of gel between the players, because the defense is going to kind of take them over.
I am interested in the Nick Jackson departure there at linebacker, just because Iowa recruits and develops linebackers so well. And I think there is some signal to the decision there of Iowa saying, hey, we need to fill the spot that Jack Campbell vacated when he got picked in the first round by the Lions, and they chose to go after Nick Jackson. What kind of drop-off, if any, are you expecting going from Jackson to the replacement?
I mean, you're losing your leading tackler, so you're going to have some drop-off there. I think a lot of the coaches are saying is that they have a lot of confidence in that linebacker group and who they bring back. So yes, you're going to expect some learning curve or a little bit of growing pains, but then you look at that linebacker group, a lot of them have experience themselves. I mean, Josh Ahern played, James Jackson played, Stevie Bracey played, who is also from Atlanta and is close to Nick Jackson family. So it's kind of like they kind of gave the baton over to him. Trey McDonald has gained a lot of weight. He's a second-year player, a redshirt freshman. You could see he added a little bit more to his frame, and the expectation is he's going to play more. He was one of the leading tacklers for the spring game as well. So, and then when you have like a guy like Lex Long, who's a safety on the roster, but his frame allows him to be versatile, and you can see him being close to the box. So there's options for Virginia to kind of adapt a little bit if they notice there's a little bit of an issue at linebacker. That's not even factoring in Cameron Robinson, their top recruit of the last class, a 4-star right here from the in-state of Virginia, in Tappahannock, Virginia. I could see him possibly playing a role in that linebacker unit as well. So I think they're going to be fine as far as Nick Jackson. You use that leader, which is hard, especially when you think you're losing Anthony Johnson, which is another vocal leader in that secondary. But I think there's enough veterans that we spoke about in the defensive front to kind of make up for that leadership vocal role.
So in the secondary, I thought Virginia kind of sneakily, because I think a lot of people nationally tuned them out when they started so poorly. I thought they had the best corner tandem in the ACC. I mean, Anthony Johnson didn't get drafted, right, but he did sign with an NFL team, I believe, the day after the draft or 2 days after. And then Fentrell Cypress was the number 1 or number 2 rated corner by 24/7 Sports in the transfer portal. He goes to FSU. Who is going to attempt to step up and take the place of those guys? Because their numbers were off the charts.
Yeah, they were called the yin and yang of the Virginia football secondary because of their personalities. Fentrell Stripe's a quiet guy, and Anthony Johnson, like I said, he was a vocal guy. It's Anthony Johnson is going to be very, very missed. And I think obviously look at his stats. You were saying they're the two best corner tandems in college football last year, underrated guys. But what he meant to the locker room is going to be tough to replace. He was a transfer out of Louisville, but you never would have guessed it when you saw him on the field. I mean, I think I've seen Anthony Johnson more times in the last few months because every time he had an opportunity, he was still on grounds during spring with his players, coaching that defensive back unit. So that's the intangibles that you're missing with Anthony Johnson, which, as you know, Bud, you can't grade that. Those are the things that you're missing in the defensive unit. So right now, you're going to see Tavon Kyle. He's a transfer that came in. He's one that Virginia recruited, and they believe he can really have an effect in that cornerback unit. I think you're going to see a lot more of him. They also recruited Malcolm Green from Clemson, another transfer from Highland Springs, a high school that Virginia would love to keep that pipeline going. His brother Miles Green is also a signee that's coming in the summer. And they expect those two to fight for some position time. And that's what they wanted to do when they went into the transfer portal is, one, they didn't expect Fentrell Cypress to enter the transfer portal. That was something that was not in the game plan going in. That was something that was unexpected. So they knew they needed to get someone quick. Anthony Johnson, they knew they were going to lose. So that's why you received those two guys that are experienced. Now, there are guys that possibly can get more role. They were injured in the spring, like Elijah Gaines. He's a guy that's been in the UVA program for a number of years. We haven't seen them healthy. Like I said, we didn't see him during the spring. So it'll be interesting to see how much he kind of factors in to that depth at corner. So like the questions you have on defense, it really is the secondary. I think that is the main concern, especially at corner, because safety, they have so many veterans on that group. They should be fine. They've worked together pretty well last year, and they should be successful together. Those two corners are going to be the crucial kind of the cog to this defense to see how successful they are. And that's the big question going to fall camp, especially when Malcolm Green hasn't been on campus yet. So he's getting in the next week or so. But yeah, they went into the transfer portal route on that one.
Jacquie, this is kind of an overarching question, but it popped in my head in going through some of these preview preps. A lot of these private schools are struggling in the transfer portal era because their administrations don't let them take let's say, quite the level of academics that some of the public schools do, or some of the more kind of diehard football schools do. Is Virginia facing that? Like I look at Stanford, it's really, really hard to get transfers in there. Northwestern, to some extent, a Vanderbilt, right? Whether it's grades or whether it's just which classes they'll actually take and which credits they will accept. How much have you heard about that with UVA?
Oh, Bud, it's been it's been a problem. I think I did a whole podcast on how horrible it is for at the transfer portal for Virginia, because I think a lot of people don't realize it's not just about GPAs. I mean, during this whole transfer portal, I guess, season, between the two windows that there was for the transfer portal, I mean, there was a player from the Ivy League that couldn't get their credits transferred to Virginia because there wasn't matching classes. I mean, that's where we are when it comes to Virginia. Not only you have to figure out, okay, which classes can be matched credit over, but there's no general studies program. And they kind of stick in there to kind of get those credits and match up side by side. So what you're looking at is a guy might transfer in, but you become ineligible because you don't have enough credits. So that's why whenever you look at Virginia, they try to recruit a guy that is either really early on in their college career so they can help get that credit catch up between their years of eligibility, or they go the grad transfer route. And the grad transfer route, you're then relying that he can apply to the grad school and get in. I mean, last year we had one offensive lineman who committed to Virginia and he didn't get in. So, and he was coming from a good school. He couldn't get into the grad transfer program. So that is the grad program. So that is the problem that UVA is facing right now. And that's why when a lot of people say like, oh, maybe UVA should go the transfer portal route to kind of reinforce, because they see some of the NIL struggles that they're having in the high school route, That's not going to work for Virginia because you have so many hurdles you have to jump when it comes to the transfer portal. I mean, Virginia has to navigate that with so much balance, because not only do you have to evaluate a kid for football, then you have to go through transcript, you have to go through admissions, you have to go through the grad school. I mean, there's a lot you need to do when it comes to this staff, and that staff has been busy just trying to figure out who can actually get into the school before even talking about football.
Special teams wise, so I got to admit, I didn't watch enough Virginia to really memorize who their original kicker was, but Brendan Farrell was really, really bad in place kicking duties, and I know he punted a little bit. Will Bettridge was not great, but he wasn't quite as bad, and their punting was also pretty terrible on the year. Do they have any kind of solution or different players or any reason for optimism here with Bettridge and I guess the punter Sparks?
Well, they are both still the starters at special teams. So we have Will Bettridge and Daniel Sparks. I think the issue that they had, and especially in relation to Daniel Spark, was coverage for that unit.
Yeah.
I think that was the bigger deal for him. I think individually, I think he did okay, but I think it was the coverage on that punt team. That has been something they worked on a lot. I even saw them during spring practices. All the coaches were wearing their headset because a lot of the things that happened during the special teams were miscommunication issues. Guys weren't lining up. Guys on the sidelines were getting penalties on special teams after a normal special teams timeout, coming out of timeouts here, coming out of a media timeout, coming out of commercial. I mean, that miscommunication is what was the major problem on special teams last year. So during the spring game, we didn't get to see a lot of that because the issue was a lot of the guys were hurt. So we didn't really see how far they've come with special teams. So you had guys that wouldn't normally be on special teams playing special teams. So we couldn't really evaluate where they are in that regard as far as the coverage team. But according to the coaches, they're more confident in that unit because they're working on the communication issues that they had on the sidelines. Because I don't know how many times you had wrong number guys on the field. You had guys who didn't know they were meant to go out there in coverage. So that was a main concern for them. I mean, I think they had delay of game a couple of times. I remember that Duke game. It was quite that Duke game, especially special teams cost them a lot. I mean, you had to feel for that defense in the game after a good start from the defense, but the special teams just kept bringing them back on the field. So that has been something that Virginia knows is a problem. And what they've said is they're going to get possibly more starters on the coverage team too. So that is something that they've been looking forward to. But most of the same faces like Will Bettridge and Daniel Spark will be those that you're expected to see on that unit.
Jacquie, where would you say, other than quarterback, is the biggest drop off between the starters and the backups? You know, the position where they just have got to stay healthy because the backups, not to bag on college kids, but just are probably not ready to play at that level.
I think right now I'm more worried about wide receiver because it's such a young group already. So I think an injury to that group, and although you would think I would say O-line, I think they have a lot of guys who's been in at least the program 2 years. But at wide receiver, it's just so young. I mean, right now, if you take out those veterans in there, and I mean veterans, I mean just Malik Washington who's coming in from Northwestern. It's such a young group, and with Virginia, if you don't have a balanced offense, you're not going to be able to run the ball, which was an issue last year. And you have such talent in the running back room that if you can't throw the ball, you're just wasting that talent in the running back room. So I think the wide receiver group needs to stay healthy for Virginia, so that they can have, a chance to creating that balanced offense that Des Kitchings and Tony Elliott want. I mean, they don't want their quarterback to be the leading rusher. That's not something that they want. They want to have Paris Jones, Mike Collins, Kobe Pace, one of those guys step up to be a leading rusher. And I think if you don't have a healthy wide receiver group there, I think that will be their issue, is they won't be able to have that balanced offense that they're striving for.
Jacquie Franciuli, Wahoo's 24/7. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Bud.